Shaila Gaur, Rohan Mehta, Anika Desai, and Vivek Kapoor, four names that seemed intertwined by music, ambition, and trust, were about to become central figures in a mystery that would shock the world. One was a rising singing sensation, while the others were drawn into a web of control, deception, and betrayal that no one could have predicted. By the time the truth emerged, fame had turned deadly, and the price of ambition was more than anyone expected. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Shaila Gaur's journey began far away from bright lights and big stages. She was born into a middle-class Indian family where music was loved but never seen as a serious career. From a young age, her voice stood out. It was not loud or dramatic, but calm and emotional, the kind that stayed in the listener's mind long after the song ended. As a child, she sang at school functions and small local events. People noticed her talent, but talent alone was never enough. Years passed with rejection, slow progress, and moments where quitting felt easier than continuing. During her early 20s, Shaila moved to a larger city to chase her dream. Life there was difficult. She lived in small rented rooms, traveled long distances for auditions, and accepted minor background singing work to survive. Many promises were made to her, and many were broken. Still, her discipline never faded. She practiced daily, recorded demos late at night, and avoided distractions. Music was not just her passion, it was her identity. Slowly, her name began appearing in small credits, then larger ones. One successful song changed everything. Her voice touched millions, and suddenly she was everywhere. Within a few years, Shaila Gaur became one of India's most respected singers. Her songs played on radios, in films, and at weddings. She was admired not only for her voice, but for her simplicity. She stayed away from controversy and focused only on work. Industry insiders described her as professional and quiet, someone who trusted easily and avoided conflict. This trust would later become her weakness. As her popularity grew, international attention followed. Music companies from abroad contacted her team, offering collaborations and global exposure. For Shaila, this was the dream she had never spoken about openly. Singing for an international audience felt like proof that all her struggles meant something. After careful planning, she agreed to travel to the United States for a long-term project that promised worldwide recognition. Before leaving India, Shaila completed several recordings and scheduled future releases. Everything appeared perfectly planned. Her family was proud, her fans excited, and her team confident. Social media posts showed her smiling at airports, expressing gratitude and hope. No one noticed the tension behind the scenes. The pressure of expectations, contracts, and new people entering her life quietly built around her. When Shaila arrived in the USA, the environment was unfamiliar but exciting. Studios were larger, schedules tighter, and decisions faster. She believed she was stepping into the next chapter of success. What she did not realize was that this chapter was already being written by others, people who saw her voice not as art, but as a valuable asset. The rise of a star had reached its peak, and unknown forces were preparing for what came next. After settling into her new apartment in the United States, Shaila Gaur tried to adjust to a life that moved much faster than anything she had known before. Her days were filled with meetings, studio visits, and paperwork that seemed never-ending. At first, she shared short updates online, photos of recording equipment and quiet city views, but slowly those updates became less frequent. The excitement she once expressed was replaced by neutral captions and long gaps of silence. Fans assumed she was busy or focusing on her work, unaware that something had begun to change. Inside the studio, the atmosphere felt different from what she was used to in India. Decisions were rushed, schedules were altered without explanation, and she often felt excluded from discussions about her own music. Important choices were made in her absence, and documents were placed in front of her with little time to read them carefully. Shaila trusted the people managing her career, believing they had her best interests in mind. Saying no felt uncomfortable, especially in a foreign country where she depended on them for almost everything. Soon, recording sessions started getting cancelled at the last moment. Promised collaborations were delayed without clear reasons. When Shaila asked questions, answers were vague and reassuring, but never direct. She was told to rest, to stay patient, to let things happen naturally. Despite these words, she sensed that control over her career was slowly slipping away. The excitement she once felt about international success began turning into confusion and quiet fear. Her social media accounts, once handled personally, were now managed by others. Posts appeared that she did not remember approving. Messages from fans went unanswered. Friends back in India tried calling her, but replies came late or not at all. Shaila spent more time alone in her apartment, surrounded by unfamiliar walls and a growing sense of isolation. The city outside remained loud and alive, but her world grew smaller each day. People close to her noticed changes during video calls. She looked tired, distracted, and less confident. She avoided discussing details about her work and changed the subject when asked about her well-being. The singer who once spoke with clarity now chose her words carefully, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. It was clear she was under pressure, though she never openly admitted it. As days turned into weeks, her silence became impossible to ignore. Scheduled appearances were quietly removed from event listings. Media outlets reported that she was taking a personal break, but no official statement came from her directly. Behind this carefully maintained calm, decisions were being made without her consent, and paths were closing before she even knew they existed. By the time her online presence completely stopped, concern had turned into alarm. Fans speculated, rumors spread, and questions grew louder. Yet within the system surrounding her, silence was treated as normal. What looked like a pause in a successful career was actually the beginning of something far more troubling, a quiet disappearance that would soon lead to shocking revelations. The morning the news broke about Shaila Gaur's death, the world seemed to stop for her fans. Headlines appeared online almost immediately, calling it a tragic and unexpected loss. At first, people assumed it was a medical emergency, something sudden and natural that could happen to anyone, even a young and vibrant singer. But as the details trickled in, confusion replaced initial shock. Shaila had been found alone in her apartment, lying on the living room floor. Nothing appeared stolen, nothing appeared broken. The scene was quiet, almost peaceful, yet the stillness carried a chilling weight. Authorities arrived quickly after a concerned neighbor reported not seeing her leave the apartment for days. Police found her front door locked, with no signs of forced entry. Her laptop and phone were on a nearby table, still powered on. A half-empty cup of tea sat on the counter, as if she had just stepped away for a moment. There were no outward signs of struggle, no visible injuries. Initially, paramedics suspected a heart attack or sudden illness, but the real cause was more complicated and disturbing. A toxicology report later revealed traces of an unprescribed substance in her system, something that had no business being there. It was subtle, but fatal. The apartment, though orderly, hinted at tension. Receipts and bills were scattered in unusual places, some documents carefully folded, others forgotten. It became clear to investigators that Shaila had been under some pressure in the days leading up to her death. Her phone contained messages that were polite but firm, hinting at disagreements with her team. Emails pointed to frustration with scheduling conflicts and financial concerns. There was nothing outright threatening, but the undertone was noticeable, a quiet struggle hidden beneath professional courtesy. Neighbors described her as polite but increasingly withdrawn. Some remembered seeing her looking out the window for long periods, lost in thought, while others noticed delivery packages piling up, unopened. There were no visitors mentioned, no casual friends dropping by, no laughter or gatherings. The apartment felt isolated, a reflection of her state of mind during her final days. For the authorities, the case was both delicate and complex. Shaila's fame attracted attention from multiple angles: media, fans, and industry insiders. Investigators had to navigate cultural nuances, language barriers, and an international dimension that complicated simple procedures. Communication with her family in India became urgent yet tense. Her parents were devastated, torn between grief and disbelief. They could not imagine how someone so full of life and energy could simply vanish from their world. As the initial investigation continued, specialists in forensic toxicology and digital evidence began to piece together a timeline. Small inconsistencies emerged: timestamps on messages, subtle changes in financial transactions, and records of visitors to her apartment building that did not match official entries. Each clue suggested that her death was not a simple accident, even if it was not yet clear who or what had caused it. The discovery of her body marked the end of Shaila Gaur's life, but it was only the beginning of a much larger mystery that would shock the world and unravel layers of deception and betrayal. The investigation into Shaila Gaur's death began quietly but quickly grew into a complex and high-stakes case. Authorities focused first on the people closest to her, the management team, assistants, and anyone who had regular access to her apartment. They interviewed every individual she interacted with during her final weeks in the United States. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Everyone described her as professional, cooperative, and polite. Yet as detectives dug deeper, small inconsistencies began to appear. Some financial records did not match the timeline of her activities, and a few individuals' accounts of her last days conflicted with timestamps on her phone and computer. These discrepancies raised questions that went far beyond what could be explained as simple oversight. The management team came under particular scrutiny. Investigators discovered that several members had been traveling with Shaila from India to the United States, and their presence was constant during her recording sessions. While she had trusted them implicitly, records suggested that not all team members were fully transparent about their actions. Large sums of money had been transferred from Shaila's accounts in India to accounts in the US just days before her death. These transfers were unusual and uncharacteristic, even for a rising international star, and they raised immediate suspicions. Detectives began examining whether these transactions had been authorized by Shaila or manipulated without her knowledge. At the same time, authorities examined Shaila's digital footprint. Her emails, social media accounts, and text messages were scrutinized for evidence of coercion or threats. Several messages indicated she had been expressing concern about her career decisions, especially regarding certain contracts she had signed after arriving in the United States. In private messages, she hinted at frustration with her team and unease about the pace at which things were moving. However, most of these messages were carefully written, polite, and professional, giving little direct evidence of immediate danger. It was subtle, almost invisible, but detectives sensed a pattern. Shaila was being controlled without her realizing the full extent. Investigators also explored the financial side of the case in depth. They reviewed contracts, payment records, and bank transfers, uncovering documents that suggested someone might have been exploiting her fame for personal gain. Certain team members stood to benefit from her silence and continued compliance, while Shaila herself had limited knowledge of the technicalities of international agreements. This imbalance created a situation where decisions affecting her career and ultimately her safety were being made by others. Each layer of financial evidence revealed motives that went beyond ordinary professional disagreements. The US authorities communicated closely with Shaila's family in India, trying to navigate cultural differences while piecing together an accurate timeline of events. Her family provided critical insights into her habits, routines, and personality, highlighting discrepancies in the behavior described by her team. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Shaila Gaur's death was no longer looking like a sudden accident. It was tied to her inner circle, her management team, and financial dealings that had spiraled out of control. What started as a tragic discovery had now evolved into a calculated and complex investigation, with motives hidden beneath layers of trust, ambition, and deception. The more detectives uncovered, the more they realized that nothing about her final days was as simple as it first seemed. As the investigation deepened, authorities uncovered a shocking detail that would change the direction of the case. A secret contract Shaila Gaur had signed shortly after arriving in the United States. The contract was not part of her original agreements in India and had been presented to her in a rush, with little explanation. At first glance, it appeared standard, but forensic experts noted unusual clauses that gave a private US-based company almost complete control over her future music rights. The company had the authority to decide which songs she recorded, which projects she joined, and how her image was used internationally. For someone like Shaila, who had built her career on her voice and artistic choices, this was a loss of autonomy she had never anticipated. The contract had been signed at a moment when Shaila was already under pressure. Her flight schedule, studio sessions, and constant adjustments to a new city had left her exhausted. She trusted her management team to guide her, and she believed they had her best interests at heart. However, the more investigators examined the paperwork, the more they realized that Shaila had little idea of the long-term consequences. The clauses were complex, legalistic, and buried within pages of dense text, effectively stripping her of control if she ever attempted to leave the agreement. Emails recovered from her accounts revealed that Shaila had begun questioning the contract privately. She had written to her family and close friends, expressing discomfort and asking whether it was normal for a company to demand such sweeping authority. She had also sent messages to her management team, seeking clarification about clauses that seemed extreme and unfair. The replies she received were polite but dismissive, assuring her that everything was standard practice and that there was no reason for concern. Despite her growing unease, the pressure to comply was constant, and she found herself isolated in an unfamiliar country with no immediate way to assert control. Financial records connected to the contract showed irregularities. Payments that should have been allocated for Shaila's personal use or artistic projects were redirected to accounts linked to the company. Investigators noted that someone had been carefully manipulating funds, creating an environment where Shaila's dependency on her management team and the company increased with each passing day. Every warning sign, every small hesitation she expressed was quietly suppressed or redirected, leaving her in a vulnerable position with few allies. This discovery reframed the investigation. Shaila's death was no longer being considered simply as a tragic accident. It now seemed tied to a battle over power, control, and money. The contract explained the growing tension she had experienced, her sudden isolation, and even some of the financial anomalies that had puzzled investigators in earlier stages. It was clear that the secret agreement was central to understanding why someone might have wanted her silenced. The realization was chilling. The very deal that promised international fame and success had become a tool that could manipulate, pressure, and ultimately endanger her life. For the first time, detectives began to suspect that Shaila's death was not merely a misfortune, but a calculated consequence of her attempts to assert independence. The quiet warnings embedded in her final communications, the strange timing of financial transfers, and the contractual restrictions painted a picture of a talented singer trapped between ambition and exploitation. Every document, every signature, and every email now carried weight in revealing how her pursuit of global recognition had intersected with danger she never imagined. For weeks, the investigation into Shaila Gaur's death seemed to circle without producing definitive answers. Early leads had pointed toward her management team, but evidence was fragmented and confusing. Then, a breakthrough came in the form of digital forensics. Experts discovered that some of the emails and messages investigators had been relying on were not authentic. They had been subtly altered, timestamps manipulated, content edited, and certain files replaced entirely. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Someone had gone to great lengths to mislead authorities, creating false trails that diverted attention away from the real culprits. It was a deliberate attempt to delay the truth. The digital manipulation was sophisticated. Files had been accessed remotely, leaving minimal traces. Forensic analysts found signs of advanced software that could rewrite email headers and message logs without leaving immediate evidence. The implication was clear. Shaila's death was entangled with people who possessed both motive and technical skill. This was not a crime of passion or opportunity. It was calculated, premeditated, and executed with precision. The team realized that the misleading evidence had caused precious weeks to be lost, allowing the perpetrators to remain hidden while investigators followed false leads. One assistant initially became a prime suspect. Her behavior appeared inconsistent, and some early messages seemed incriminating. Authorities focused heavily on her, building a case that suggested she might have had access to substances or information related to Shaila's death. But as the digital evidence was untangled, it became obvious that these clues had been planted. The assistant was entirely innocent, a victim of a complex scheme designed to confuse investigators. Clearing her name was both a relief and a stark reminder of how deeply Shaila's world had been infiltrated by deception. The discovery of tampered evidence forced investigators to reassess all previous assumptions. Contracts, financial transactions, and email correspondences were examined again, this time with the knowledge that nothing could be taken at face value. Specialists developed new strategies to verify authenticity, cross-referencing multiple sources and consulting experts in cyber forensics from outside the initial investigative team. The process was painstaking, slow, and meticulous, but it gradually revealed patterns that had been obscured by the earlier manipulations. Every piece of falsified data was a breadcrumb that pointed toward a larger scheme, a web of control surrounding Shaila Gaur's career and her life. The realization that someone had actively misled the investigation created a chilling sense of urgency. If such manipulation had occurred before, it could continue after, potentially destroying evidence or intimidating witnesses. Investigators now understood that they were up against individuals who were not only financially motivated, but also technically capable and unafraid to interfere with legal processes. It became clear that Shaila's death was only the visible part of a much larger puzzle, one that involved deception, coercion, and careful planning. With the planted evidence exposed, authorities finally began to focus on the people who had both motive and opportunity to harm Shaila. The path forward was no longer distracted by innocent parties or false trails. Every remaining clue now needed to be evaluated for its authenticity and relevance. What had once seemed like an unsolvable mystery now had a direction, and the investigation entered a critical phase, identifying the real culprits behind a crime that had been masked by digital lies, financial manipulation, and a chillingly methodical attempt to hide the truth. After weeks of painstaking investigation, authorities finally zeroed in on a figure who had the motive, opportunity, and resources to orchestrate Shaila Gaur's death. An influential Indian-American music investor connected to the secret contract she had signed. He had positioned himself as a mentor and supporter, presenting the agreement as a golden opportunity for international fame. On the surface, his demeanor was professional and encouraging, but beneath it lay a calculated strategy to control Shaila's career and profit from her success. Financial records revealed that he stood to gain millions if she remained bound by the contract, and conversely, he risked significant losses if she attempted to exit or challenge it. Investigators discovered that the investor had been closely monitoring Shaila's movements since her arrival in the United States. He had access to her apartment building, her studio schedule, and even her private communications through intermediaries within her management team. Every delay, every cancelled recording session, and every anxious message she had sent about the contract was documented and reported to him. The control he exercised was not overt, but insidious. He had constructed an environment where Shaila was isolated, uncertain, and pressured to comply without realizing the full danger she faced. Forensic evidence showed that the substance found in Shaila's system had been administered gradually over time, carefully calculated to appear accidental. The timing coincided with moments when Shaila had expressed doubts about the contract or questioned her team's advice. Investigators pieced together delivery records, surveillance footage, and expert testimony to confirm that the investor had orchestrated this slow poisoning, making it seem natural and preventing anyone from suspecting foul play initially. It was a methodical and chilling act, executed with patience and precision. Emails and internal communications revealed the investor's awareness of Shaila's hesitations. He had warned intermediaries that any attempt by Shaila to reclaim control of her music rights would have consequences, using financial incentives and veiled threats to maintain compliance. The messages suggested that he believed Shaila's talent was not hers to control, but his to exploit, and her independence was a threat to his financial empire. Every action taken to isolate her, manipulate her team, and create confusion around her behavior was designed to ensure that he maintained control until the end. When authorities confronted him, inconsistencies and evasions became apparent, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial trails, witness statements, and forensic reports all converged to paint a clear picture of premeditation. The sophistication of his operation shocked investigators. It was rare to see such a combination of financial manipulation, psychological control, and medical knowledge used to execute a crime so deliberately. It was no longer a case of an unexpected tragedy, but a planned and calculated act of murder. Even as the investor was arrested and charged, the investigation highlighted how vulnerable Shaila had been in an unfamiliar environment, surrounded by people who claimed to protect her while actively undermining her. The story that had begun with the rise of a talented singer now revealed the dark intersection of ambition, control, and greed. Shaila's death was a stark reminder that in the pursuit of fame and success, those who appear closest can sometimes be the greatest threats, shaping the fate of even the brightest stars with deadly precision. Even after the arrest of the investor, the story of Shaila Gaur's death did not end neatly. The case officially closed in the eyes of the authorities, but lingering questions and missing pieces left a shadow over the resolution. Some evidence had mysteriously disappeared during the investigation, and a few individuals who might have had critical information were never interviewed. The silence surrounding these gaps created an uneasy feeling among investigators, her family, and fans alike. While justice had technically been served, the truth seemed only partially revealed, leaving Shaila's story unfinished and hauntingly unresolved. Her family struggled to reconcile the official narrative with the reality of what they had lost. They knew the vibrant, dedicated, and loving singer who had once poured her soul into every performance was gone, but the reasons behind her death felt larger and more complex than any statement or report could capture. They continued to ask questions, hoping to understand not only who was responsible, but also how such a brilliant life could be consumed by greed and manipulation. Each unanswered question weighed heavily, highlighting the vulnerabilities of artists who, despite their talent, are often dependent on systems they barely understand. Fans of Shaila Gaur also felt the impact. Social media, once a platform for celebration of her voice, became a space for speculation, mourning, and debate. Tributes poured in from around the world, blending grief with confusion. Many wondered whether more could have been done to protect her, whether signs of manipulation had been ignored, and how fame and international ambition could expose artists to such dangerous circumstances. The story resonated beyond her immediate circle, touching anyone who had ever admired her work or followed her journey. For the investigators, the case served as both a victory and a lesson. They had successfully identified the perpetrator, gathered evidence, and navigated a complex international web of deceit, but the experience also highlighted the limits of any legal system when faced with premeditated, carefully concealed crimes. The realization that digital manipulation, financial exploitation, and psychological control could mask the truth so effectively was sobering. They documented their findings in exhaustive reports, hoping future cases could benefit from the lessons learned in Shaila's tragic story. Shaila's artistic legacy, however, endured despite the tragedy. Her songs continued to be played, streamed, and celebrated, reminding the world of the voice that had once captivated millions. The recordings she had completed before her death became symbols of her dedication and talent, a bittersweet reminder of what had been lost. Music critics and fellow artists praised her ability to convey emotion, noting that her performances were not just technically skilled, but deeply human. It was a legacy that no manipulation, contract, or act of cruelty could erase. Yet the shadow of suspicion and unanswered questions lingered. The gaps in the investigation, the missing evidence, and the people who were never held accountable left an air of mystery around her story. Shaila Gaur's death became a cautionary tale about the costs of ambition and the dark realities that can accompany fame. Her life and career, full of brilliance and promise, ended abruptly, but her story continues to resonate, warning others about the fragile boundary between trust and exploitation, and the unseen dangers that can lurk behind the glittering lights of success.